All right, and I think we're live. So welcome everybody to this webinar and to this meetup. Great to have you. We'll wait a couple of minutes for people to join. A few housekeeping rules. You can actually use the chat group to ask questions, and we'll monitor the questions as we go. Please make sure you select all so everybody can view and not only panelists. And that will allow us to actually answer the questions. Feel free to ask questions in between as well. Also feel free to say hello. Now, I'm sure you are joining from all over the world here. And we are going to talk about the difference between service catalogs and internal developer platforms, how to use these in combination. We have a really interesting demo actually prepared using a service catalog, in this case, LeanIX, and we are also using an internal developer platform to actually show the end-to-end flow here. We will give it one more minute maybe, and then we can take it from there. Christoph, can you hear us now? Looks like you can't. So I'm the moderator for tonight. Christoph is experiencing technical issues. And I'm here with Dominik, and we'll give the whole thing a minute more. I'm sure people will be joining throughout the session as well, but then we can kick it off. Again, a few housekeeping rules. Please feel free to use the chat and make sure you select all attendees and not only panelists to ask questions. And I'll be monitoring the session, and we can then ask questions and take it from there. A few familiar faces. Hey, Matteo. Good to see you. And yeah, very much looking forward to the session. Okay, it's in our time zone at least 7:04. So I think we should get started. I'm here today with Dominik. My name is Kaspar. And maybe we can start with a brief introduction from you and Dominik, and you can introduce us into the topic that we'll be analyzing tonight.
Awesome. So nobody was dying here. It was just something falling down. So Kaspar, Christoph, thanks a lot for having me, and hi everyone out there in the community. My name is Dominik. I'm calling in from Cologne today. I work with LeanIX, and I'm a VP product at LeanIX. I'll tell you some thoughts about LeanIX in a second, but maybe for you guys to know a bit about myself and my motivation, I made it myself a passion to venture between business and technology, looking into technology from the business angle and vice versa. So happy to always draw the line there. So LeanIX is a company out of Bonn, and we actually had our 10 years anniversary this year. We are doing software as a service. So we are a full product company originating in the area of enterprise architecture, which is a very dire area for most developers, but which we managed to transform to some extent into a collaborative exercise, bringing many people together around business and IT. And my children are making some noise in the back, so please forgive them there.
The joy of home office, don't worry at all.
Exactly. So I won't bore you today with any marketing issues, but the two things that you should take away from LeanIX is we always tried to bring as much information as possible to various stakeholders, which is why we see a lot of investment into usability, into ease of use for different people. And then we are a tech company actually ourselves as well. We have 150 people in product merely in Bonn in Germany. And we shared before how we made a microservice transformation ourselves, how we today really run a very advanced tech stack with Azure, with Kubernetes, but obviously still struggle with quite some issues ourselves. If you're interested in topics like this, feel free to ping me afterwards. Happy to share some resources and learnings there. So I hope this was not too much of a marketing talk for now. I would like to motivate a bit why it's interesting for us and also for our customers to venture into the topic of building software, and why we come all the way from enterprise architecture. It's a very strategic topic, all the way down to service catalog and then IDPs. What we learned together with our customers is that the topic of building software obviously changed dramatically in the last years. And this is, first of all, fantastic news for all of you out there. In the end, your job matters more than ever. And it's not only like the big lighthouse thing, like Volkswagen saying now we are hiring dozens of developers. It's more even tangible when we look into traditional brick and mortar businesses. And for sure, some of you are out there in this as well, where we see, wow, in order to defend the businesses against Amazon, against fintechs, all of a sudden, very traditional companies really invest into platform, into developer experience, and try to map the customer journey to technology. And this is clearly where we try to form, like now, a new hotspot and a sweet spot, which I will show in the end. Obviously, all in the spirit of empowered development teams, which we really try to also follow at LeanIX, which is obviously not always easy, both from the business side. In the end, the role of a manager like me changes on a daily basis. You need to empower teams. You need to think in problems, not in solutions. And this is obviously very, very much a culture thing. But then also from the engineering side, where we see a lot of engineers being challenged by this. Hey, all of a sudden, they need to think about things like OCE duty. They need to think about how do I really understand my customer? And from your daily job that some of the engineers have a good time with this. Some of the engineers might have a harder time with this. So what I will show in a second, and then also pass over to Kaspar in the integration, is to say we are providing a tooling right now dedicated to product teams. We call this value stream management. I will share some of this in a second, but really you can also think about, first of all, as a service catalog, with the goal to discover a lot of things that you have out there from GitHub, from Kubernetes, to have one tool where you can trust having a documentation, where you have ideally a close collaboration with your Slack or Teams, for example, to automate processes like snook warnings for you, but where you then also can venture into dev efficiency and dev experience topic like templating and creating new applications directly from scratch. And clearly why we call this value stream management, and why we also don't stop at discovery. In the end, we want to help you as development teams to optimize your processes. So I will share some ideas on how we calculate DORA metrics and how we relate it in the end to teams at the end of the webinar. So maybe just as a quick intro from my end, and Kaspar, handing it over to you.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm particularly excited about this. I mean, I've been talking about these developer platforms for a long time now. It's like this rapidly accelerating trend. It's fascinating to see how fast the communities around us are accelerating, the Slack communities, these meetups. That's really quite fascinating to observe. One of the key things is that it's still a field that is at the bleeding edge of developer tooling, really. That it's really undifferentiated. A lot of the wording is blurry. There are lots of things flying around, internal developer platforms, self-service catalog. And I think, Dominik, you put it very well. The self-service catalog, if you look at this, the way you just described it, becomes really clear, right? It's about categorizing, it's about sorting, it's about documenting. It's about gathering metrics. It's about gathering metadata on the service level. But there is more to an application. There's also the whole operational element: operate your application, template your application, operate your application, monitor your application, observe your application. And in this modern world of platforms and self-service layers in particular, we want to use this webinar to actually shed lights on how all of these different pieces fit together. This is work in progress. I've just seen several releases from Gartner on this. You read this and you see, oh, it's still early days. They're still themselves trying to make sense of the different categories. But at least in my head, it's becoming more clear how the different elements belong to each other. Dominik, could you go to the next slide? Yeah, so what is an internal developer platform? And an internal developer platform, for me, is a self-service layer for developers to build, deploy, and operate applications across the entire life cycle. If you want, the service catalog is part of your internal developer platform, as is maybe Jenkins, as is maybe Terraform, as is maybe your SNCC vulnerability scan. For me, an internal developer platform is the sum of everything that gives these capabilities to the developers to work on and operate their application in self-service, really to follow this mantra: you build it, you run it, which is what we're probably all aim to achieve, and reach true DevOps, which are without overloading people with cognitive load, and reducing the dependencies between the developers and the operations teams, something that where we've seen a lot of the problems occur throughout the last decade, really. Now, the internal developer platform, now let's zoom in a little bit and actually understand the pain point. And Dominik, if you could go to the next phase here. Yeah, exactly. So can we articulate the problem a little better? The problem that around operating applications. And this is really interesting if you look at it from a data perspective. If you look at the individual apps, every app consists out of 25 times more components than 10 years ago. You have a vast amount of more specialized tools, and we're now in a global environment. If you think about the scale of usage, the amount of users, the amount of volume that we're operating, often multi-cloud, 17% of all the workloads run multi-cloud, distributed across the world with redundancy and disaster recovery and higher security standards. The scale at which we're operating is vastly larger, and everything is vastly more complex than, again, 10 years ago. And if you could go to the next slide, then the core evil that we have identified here is static configuration management. We're basically taking all of the different little components that we need to operate an application, and we maybe even have those components listed in our service catalog, but that's really not enough. We're taking these components and we're now binding them together with static scripts, and those are very buggy, and we have to maintain them, and you have the YAML files and Helm charts and bash scripts of this world. And that often means and leads to, and we see a lot of that in the research, that developers wait and operations drowns. And so the idea of modern platform APIs or operators, which is the next element in our journey to get the complete perfect internal developer platform. Dominik, if you could go into the next slide. Exactly. The idea is to say, well, rather than executing static components, let's actually take them, let's actually template them, and let's actually dynamically create configurations and then operate applications across the entire life cycle against one endpoint. Again, I'm sure this sounds like a lot to digest and a little bit cryptic, but it has a magic to it. And I deeply believe that this is where the industry is going, and this is what we're seeing a lot in reality. The key beauty of this is that it eliminates the chaos and complexity by letting you, the developer in particular, operate applications really from idea to production against a single API. And if we talk about ID to production in self-service, that's literally about how do we model configurations, how do we manage and orchestrate infrastructure, how do we provision it, how do we deploy this. And we're not talking about how do we build this, right? And this is the next thing where we have to see, like, how does CI and all of that fit in, but really about fusing the application bits together dynamically with every single deployment, and then further down the lifecycle, visibility and logs and governance and RBAC, environment management and auditability. All right, let's actually, I know this is a lot, let's zoom out a little bit in the next graphic and actually see how these things fit together. With these modern platforms, literally what we are going to show you in just a second, you have a developer workflow that isn't materially changing. You have your IDE to code. This can be Visual Studio Code. You have your version control system. This can be GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket, whatever your preference is here. You have CI to build, right? Most of these platforms are containerized workloads. And CI, again, responsible for building, testing everything. And then you have the platform API to actually compose a model of the application dynamically at every deployment, creating all of the configuration files and then actually executing and operating. And there are certain interfaces into this platform API. One of them is the service catalog, because it will push templates that you can select into the platform API, and it will then return the actual metadata for the service to catalog, for the service to document. We're going to look at this in more detail in just a second. Then you have self-service user interfaces to help developers operate these applications. Think of them like Heroku, all on top of your own tech and tools, self-service CLI, like the Heroku CLI, but underneath really these core concepts here. All right, now I'll hand over back to you, Dominik, to actually show us how these components fit together. I think we have one more slide on the lifecycle service catalog to exactly service catalog to here again. Do you want to cover this, or shall I?
Yeah, happy to. I mean, in the end, what Kaspar described can fit perfectly together if we think about now these two worlds and think about service catalog clearly as something for the dev teams to say, what do we have in there, but also we will see it in a second as a link to the business. So if we start our life cycle from the service catalog itself and assuming, wow, we have a decent catalog in place, then we will see in a second that ideally this makes it very, very easy for a developer to jump in to say, aha, I select my technology. We will show some Node.js example in a second. Then exactly it's where the platform API, where what Kaspar described, kick in to say, can we, as easy as possible, provision, create, deploy an application, operate the life cycle in the end, and then ideally bring it back into the business view so that we can have two things. Number one is that we can meet all the requirements that we have from a business side. Think about it like AWS tagging or Kubernetes labeling. Do I understand who the owner of a certain resource is? Think about it like product or domain mapping. Do I understand where my particular service is making a difference and where maybe not? And things like DORA, where I can then measure how good my development performance is, and ideally step-by-step extend it to cover, for example, other flow metrics as well, to inform myself about Jira tickets, bugs, and step-by-step improve in a data-driven way. So with this in mind, let me quickly jump over and show you one sample workflow that we can use as an obviously pet project or as an obviously starting point. But one way to look into LeanIX value stream management is from the product side. So Kaspar, you hopefully see my application right now. We have an example which we call Pet Shop, whatever our business is. We don't care for this for a second. But the important thing is that we understand who's responsible from the business side and maybe some other interesting attributes from the business side. And now, in our understanding, beauty of a service catalog is to combine things and think about it like a knowledge graph, to say my particular microservices that I found from GitHub, from Kubernetes, I actually linked into the business side. And you see directly that I can track some status. This is already migrated to some new architecture, while there the migration is pending, or some lifecycle information. And if we now traverse the graph to some extent, then we can extend into domains, so into the way you are structuring your teams internally, which is then obviously very interesting in terms of Convey and all those things, or then obviously to go into a team directory to think about team topology, where's the team located, or even fill in some blanks if we don't know, like the technical owner or other responsibles. And also from the other side, if we would start the journey from the tech, so for example, from the cluster, then we can do the very, very similar exercise to say on a certain cluster, I want to understand what's deployed. Yes, you see this with kubectl as well, but ideally use something like a label to now derive the information. Aha, this is actually a certain business service. This is what they call address manager. And in an ideal way now, open up the graph to not only look into business side, but also look into APIs or technologies. Now, obviously, this graph is quite powerful, but it doesn't help you in your daily life to look into a broad repository like this. Sorry, I lost my share there. But where we invested very much into is now to say, hey, we want to make this information as easy as possible to digest for people. So one way to look into this would be a software catalog, to say, hey, I want to understand what services are owned by a certain team and want to understand only some core attributes. And maybe I just want to subscribe to learn if there are some changes around this. Or very similarly, an API catalog we see growing much in importance. Yes, there are a lot of technical API management tools, but you know, a lot of open API descriptions are flying around, and potentially same topic there. I want to understand who's responsible from a business side, from a technical side. I want to be able to browse some documentation. Or, and this is where we would close the loop right now into Humanitec and into the IDP, would be to think about technologies. And one way would be to look into a technology radar, where we can inform community like, hey, what technology would we actually want to use? And then if we now enter the life cycle to say, great, I have a Node.js technology, potentially very artificial or without versions, etc., but you get the context. I know whom to contact for more details, or ideally I would now jump directly, for example, into a GitHub repo, where I then just say use this template and get started. And Kaspar, handing it over to you to continue the journey from here.
Amazing. Okay. So, right, let me share my screen. And so what we've done right now is that basically to put ourselves into the shoes of the developer, I'm starting my first day. I have my service catalog. I now actually want to launch a Node.js application. That's actually like this combination, a combination that I see lots of teams do and actually utilize and make use of. And what Dominik showed is that you have this adopt radar. You go to start from template. Now, in the actual usage case, which wouldn't be a demo, it would automatically now execute for the sake of this demo to actually show you the steps, like what's happening behind the hood. I'm now going to show you the repository first, so you get an understanding of what's actually happening. And then it will basically execute this package, in this case, the pipeline and GitHub Actions, and would actually push this to the platform API. And the platform API would now know what to do with this sample. So what do we have here? We have a Node.js template, and it contains an abstract description of how you as an organization imagine or want your microservice really to look at scale. It contains things like, the service code itself. It contains things like the Docker, the Docker file to then build the image. It contains things like what infrastructure you want, and this means it's basically in an abstract way telling Humanitec to say, hey, I am a Node.js application. I want to have a Postgres database, or I think in this case, I want to have a DNS record and I want to be exposed at port 8080. And by the way, dear system, I want Humanitec to already be configured, or the platform API to already be configured to have deployment automation built in, so that if I do a Git push, then it will update automatically. Yeah. So this is what we call platform as code. I'm packaging an application with all its components, the configuration, the infrastructure, and the instruction for the platform API on how to actually operate as code. Now, let's actually go in here. And now what I'm showing you would be basically curl commands or JavaScript that would be executed by LeanIX or any service catalog really automatically. But we'll just do it manually now. I'll run the workflow. We'll give it an application ID. Let's come up with a fancy name and say Lean Service Catalog, whatever. All right, so we'll run the workflow. What happens now is that the workload is starting to actually take all of the different components we have here, and it's now actually building our Docker files, and they're pushing an image to a registry. In this case, I think GCR, and then it's going to look at the default baseline configurations, and it's going to create, because we are in this case using creating a new namespace in a GKE cluster. We are creating manifests. There are so many exciting things happening in the background. We are actually creating a DNS record with Route 53, I think. We are configuring the platform API to accept the deployment automations. And all of these things happen in the background here. Now, the demo gods have to be with us. And then in a couple of seconds, we will actually see the up and running system here in Humanitec and in the self-service UI here, which in the background has the platform API. So while this is actually executing, let's look at this again. Again, we have our IDE. This is what we're skipping right now, version control system, GitHub CI. We're currently using GitHub Actions. The platform API is working in the background here. What I just showed you here is the self-service UI service catalog currently done with LeanIX here in this case. All right, that should be now working. Let's see whether we see our wonderful application. And here we go. It's the service catalog application. The demo gods are with us, and we can actually open this, and it has a plain Node.js template, nothing too fancy. And if we go into this workload, which has been configured based on the workload profile, then we can see the details of the workload surfaced in this user interface. We can see that it has already automatically created a DNS resource. It has created a beautiful domain here, random string Schäferbauch Bergstrom something at newapp.io. Fun fact, this system actually makes sure it's not using swear words, which I think is really helpful. We can actually copy this and have a look at the running. Sorry, this is not what I wanted to show you. Have a look at the actual thing here, and we have hello node right here. Now, how does the system know what DNS to use, where to deploy this? Well, there's a resource matching here in the background that basically says, well, if there's a default environment, which created through this template, please use a certain cluster, certain DNS in the background. And this here, again, I don't want to go into much detail. You can use Terraform or drivers or whatever in the background. Right, to show you that this actually works now and the developer can start coding right away, let's actually go in the code here, and I'll do something that isn't very attractive, but I'll actually write right in here. And so, hello, demo audience. This is so amazing. Okay. I'm again very creative and will commit the changes. And now deployment automations have been set through the code, and we can probably see them here. So you can see every time the head of the image Node.js template is updating, please make sure that you deploy this. And so in a couple of seconds, an automated deployment will roll in and will update this this new change. This is already working here, and it's updating this. And then the platform API will receive the build notification, and it will update this. And then you can probably imagine what happens. I'll show you this here, but I'll show it with the text. I don't want to wait for this because this will probably take 30 more seconds. So what happens now? We have this this completely running application, really, including everything. Like, just imagine how much time that would usually cost if you go to operations and ask them to do this. So this is really pretty amazing, but it has to be indexed. It has to be documented. We have to make sure that the team, really, the organization knows, hey, there is a new microservice. We want to catalog this. We want to document this. And this is where the API now basically signals back to the service catalog. And so I'm signaling back now to Dominik to show you how service catalog is now taking over again from the platform API.
This was planned way in advance. Yes, this is nice handover again. Good practice. Yeah. Okay, you need to stop sharing, then I can take over again. Fantastic. Good. I know we are almost above our time, so let me keep it short from here. But I just want to show some examples how then the way back and then also the value add from there can look. So very straightforward example might be from a mono repo where you have a manifest in there now based on Humanitec, just saying, hey, out of the manifest, give me the information. What owner do I have? What team do I have? What product do I have? Or a bit more like real life example from our very own source code repo to say, in the end, we just want to have a GitHub action configured in this static template, parsing, for example, things like open source dependencies directly for each deployment and submitting it back into the catalog. Or even easier to now think about just a GitHub integration, which takes up everything from GitHub that is running and just process it into the service catalog, or as promised before, information then from public cloud where you deployed your stuff, where, for example, in our case, it's more or less just about giving a tenant ID and then receiving things like Azure functions and all the different cloud infrastructure directly, then leveraging tag information to, for example, understand where this is belonging. And finally, obviously, to say, can we go even above like a standard service catalog and really look into like, where do we create value and how good are we in creating value for our customers? So for example, for a team of ours right now, linking this data that we received from Humanitec or from another platform, now with different sources, and maybe you gave us directly the information as well that a certain Jira project is related, so you can see violations or certain KPIs from here. Or then going into the topic of DORA, which is where I want to conclude with from my end, to adhere to industry best practices that are evolving, informing, first of all, your development teams around, hey, how is deployment frequency proceeding? How is lead time to changes proceeding? and ideally step by step aggregating it to team owners or to product owners to have a joint view, like between business side and dev. And if you want to look a bit into the details, what we are doing there, we invested quite a lot into a very easy to use, quite sophisticated API, which in the end calculates the DORA metrics for you based on changes, based on releases that you can typically get out of CI/CD tooling, or then based on incidents which you, for example, get from a server, from a service like PagerDuty. And ideally there, first of all, serving the development teams itself to understand really better in a data-driven way what they are doing, and then obviously leveraging the dialogue with the business side. And by this, I would conclude it from my end. I just want to steal like 2 seconds of your time in here and maybe invite you for 10 more minutes from our end. So if you are interested in a Millennium Falcon and a Lego One, we prepared a developer experience survey ourselves. Would be glad if you liked what you heard here. So just follow the QR code and maybe take the survey. Would definitely appreciate it. Otherwise, I believe handing it back now to Kaspar or Christoph, not sure, to go for Q&A.
Yeah, I have sound now. Sorry.
Yes.
No idea what happened. Kaspar, has the deployment been successful?
Oh yeah, I actually shared this wonderful domain here, and you can see the message.
Cool, very good. Thanks. Yeah, thanks to the two of you for guiding us through this. We have a first question from David. And if you have questions, if anybody else in this audience has questions, please feel free to drop them either in the chat or the Q&A section, whatever is easier for you. So David is asking, how is promotion across dev, QA, staging, prod handled? How are service version across the stages cataloged? I think that's a very interesting question. I don't know who wants to go first in that.
That is a great question. Dominik, you or me?
Please go first.
Kaspar.
So yeah, that's a good question. So if you look at the promotion against like between these different stages, you the platform API is basically using the same configuration, the same abstract application configuration throughout all of the environments. It's environment agnostic. And the only thing that changes underneath are the matching criteria. So for a production environment, you might want to use a Cloud SQL instance that is production grade. And for staging, you might want to use, for some strange reason, RDS. And then for dev, you just want to use a Helm chart, really. And so what the platform does is basically, if you say, now deploy this to staging, then it's just looking at the matching. It's dynamically creating the configurations again, and it is then actually deploying everything and wiring it up and creating, again, a representation, basically a state file of the actual configuration for this environment. Yeah, that is pretty much it. And it's basically signaling the state, what is running where, in what version, in what environment, and it can then actually signal this back to the service catalog as well. Dominik, how is the service catalog responding to this?
Yeah, it's interesting because we see that often the challenge for companies that we are working with is really to get this catalog set up in the first stage. And while obviously you can go very, very detailed and sophisticated, often the value is by surfacing the easy things first. So think about your support colleagues. Do they understand for a certain support ticket which team to address? For those cases, you don't need stages. You just first of all need to say, hey, there is a certain service doing a certain job. And then the other perspective on this often is for the specialists. So for example, internally for our Kubernetes specialists, we are not building the service catalog. They are going to their Kubernetes tooling, they are going to the Azure portal, and they are obviously way, way faster in this. So what we see our customers doing is really asking or thinking backwards to say, what value do I provide with this catalog? And then often the answer is, at least for the less mature customers, we don't need staging in there. First of all, we want to uncover how to resolve the dependencies.
Okay, understood. Hope that answers your question, David. If not, feel free to shoot a follow-up question. Renan is asking, what are the key differences between the self-service UI and self-service CLI?
Yeah, that's a good one. So there is no difference really. It's just a different interaction method. So there's the core, the operator, the API, everything API first, at least in our implementation, and then you can basically consume this through a CLI. You can consume this through a UI. You can, in our case, very soon consume this with code only, code first. You never have to leave your version control system. I think it's really important to acknowledge that we're living in a diverse world, and in enterprises with a couple of dozen developers minimum, you have a lot of different preferences. So you have to make sure that you actually meet those preferences of the individual users.
Okay, understood. And maybe speaking of version control systems, maybe a question more for you, Dominik. Robert is asking, why not keep your service catalog in Git? Then you have version control.
Might come to the very provocative answer from the beginning about this empower teams as two-way street. And clearly, I mean, we observe a lot of companies in the market, for example, looking into Backstage, looking into their own service catalog tooling. And clearly what we see is that for you as a development team, this can create great success because you have your knowledge base in the tooling. What we see is that the major difference really comes from then also taking your product managers, taking your support people, etc., with you who are not familiar with GitHub. And clearly this is where we seek to like cross the bridge then to all these business stakeholders out there. Ideally, and this is where we're actively working on with customers, for example, in a conjunction with something like Backstage to say, hey, the metadata that is used to document things in our catalog can one-on-one be used for Backstage as well, if there is value in having like a dev-only platform as well.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So I think it's absolutely clear that as developers, we never want to leave code, and that is absolutely the case. I think we have to acknowledge that service catalogs matter from a certain team size onwards. If you are 10 people and you have 4 or 5 services, you should definitely not use like even something as large scale as a platform. You have short ways, everybody is a specialist, right? But with growing differentiation, the pure Git-based model is often falling apart. And there's one more thing. The reality in the enterprise is you have many different Git instances, you have many different CI, you have many different providers, and you have to make sure that all of those data across all of the teams actually find their way into a single system.
Yeah, I think that the size argument is something I easily get. Yes, it can become very confusing over time.
Yeah, Christoph, Kaspar, I shared actually some development insight from our end, very concretely around Log4Shell, where in the end it was really about.
But you just shared it only to host and panelists. Maybe if you want to share to everybody, then I think the audience would much appreciate that.
We'll
good,
sure.
good.
Yeah, but there, I mean, the beauty was not only to have the dev view in this, but then also to have like the product and prioritization view on this. Where do we need to resolve Log4Shell as an organization first, because it has the higher business impact.
Yeah, very good point. I think it's these questions like where do I have to look first? I also remember talking to people that say, okay, but I have no idea which version is running where. So if I have a security issue, I don't know what to do and where to start, especially in a global org. Yeah, I get that point. Cool. Yeah, go ahead, Kaspar.
Yeah, I would actually be really interested. What's your view, Dominik? From what size onwards? If you talk with other developers, from what size onwards do you recommend something like a service catalog?
I can share. We have really the cases in our dev team, and again, it's about 150 people. So maybe this is a good good benchmark. I believe witnessing the journey internally at LeanIX, it started around something like 100 devs, where all from one day to the other, it was not clear anymore for support people to whom to reach out for a certain functionality. And you can see the symptoms if you see Slack messages piling up, like who is responsible for this? And then random people appearing in team channels to say, hey, can you help me with this functionality? No, this is this team, etc., etc. Then all of a sudden you realize, wow, you are wasting time. You're wasting time of the guys with an urgent issue, for example, from support, but obviously you're wasting focus time for your dev teams as well. So this is like the one angle. And then clearly the other angle is this, while we are a large company and all of a sudden we need to really professionalize the way we are doing development. And often there we see our champions starting like with one team, with a certain department, not trying to boil the ocean and say, now we are fixing software development for our complete corporate, but step by step, obviously, improving the processes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Very interesting. All right. Any more questions?
Still waiting for it.
Good. Yeah, this is such a new topic. It's great to see. I always talk about this lag function. The observation is that 5 years after a team becomes cloud native, they're realizing, wow, it's actually not the brave new world everybody promised, and things start falling apart, and then they go all in on this static product catalog versus dynamic service catalog. Well, maybe I can take that. A static product catalog versus a dynamic service catalog is probably the wrong. So at least what I meant, and maybe Dominik, you correct me, is static configuration versus dynamic configuration. So static configuration means I'm scripting my charts as a human for every single little bit, and then I deploy against static infrastructure, maybe static set of Terraform files, and I execute this, and then I have Argo CD sync this. So that's basically sort of the static, more old school platforms. And then we have the dynamic world, where we basically have templates, we have an abstract model, and the creation of the context, of the complete representation of the application happens dynamically at every single deployment. But then that's synced back to the service catalog. Dominik, is there also a dynamic service catalog?
Yeah, the story that I can share, maybe quite tangible one, is recently when we updated the Kubernetes cluster. So we deprovisioned, I don't know, some namespaces, some services, and actually we forgot one because it was not in the script. So obviously we want to handle like infrastructure very, very dynamically, but then architectural split is still a thing in like modern DevOps companies. And ideally you're alerted on this. So in this case, the service catalog even can be something like your safety net to say, great, the dynamic configuration that you're step-by-step maturing helps you, but you always have this lifeline to say, hey, how is reality looking like? And obviously in a vanilla world, this would not be the case because your tooling, your IAC has it all under control. But as I said, we are seeing it ourselves that reality is often different.
Okay. I think those are nice last words, Dominik. Thank you so much to both of you, Kaspar and Dominik. Sorry for my sound problems in the beginning. No idea what happened there. Now you see me twice. Thank you everybody for participating. We'll share a recording tomorrow together with some useful links. If you have follow-up questions for either Kaspar or Dominik, I think you're both happy to receive them, right? Cool. So have a nice day or evening or night, everybody, depending on from where you join, and see you in one of the next meetups.
Great. Thank you so much. A wonderful evening.
Thanks so much for having me. Bye-bye.
Bye.